covering the world of professional wrestling. This is the Signature Spot with Chris Toplack.
3, 2, 1.
All right. Listening to the latest episode of the Signature Spot, man. Matthew McConaughey style. Something different to open up the show. My name is Chris Toplack, and thank you as always for tuning into the latest episode of the Signature Spot. If you haven't already done so, I'm going to just call this out in the beginning and we'll leave it here. Subscribe to the Signature Spot on YouTube. The difference on there is that typically there are some photos to go along with the dialogue and the conversation. But if you also listen on traditional podcast apps, such as Apple, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, or Overcast, you can subscribe there for the latest episodes. I promise you they will pop up. They will be available. There are also partners such as thegorillaposition.com, and you can be a part of the conversation. You can follow all of my social media handles at the Signature Spot on Facebook, at Chris Toplack on Twitter. There is also a Signature Spot account on Twitter too, the best kept secret, not Buddy Murphy, and at the Signature Spot on Instagram. I also do post blogs on thesignaturesspot.com. So today I am reliving the entire history of the King of the Ring tournament. So not the pay-per-view, but specifically the tournament, all the way from the inaugural event in 1985 until the most recent King of the Ring tournament here in 2019. Plus, I select the best king, best tournament, best performance, most important moment, and the best match. And that starts right now.
Our topic of the week.
The King of the Ring tournament was first held in 1985, and it was built as an elimination bracket tournament where 16 wrestlers competed in an effort to advance against another winner. Then the winner was ultimately crowned King of the Ring, where traditionally they would sit on a throne, wear a crown, and they would hold the golden scepter. Now, despite the inaugural event taking place 8 years prior, it was only until 1993 when King of the Ring debuted on pay-per-view. And the only wrestler to have won the tournament twice was Bret Hart in 1991 and 1993. Technically, that was consecutive victories because there was no King of the Ring tournament in 1992. You will notice throughout this entire Reliving the Tournament series, there's a lot of inconsistencies. And what I mean by that is traditionally there are 16 wrestlers. Sometimes there's 15 because somebody gets a bye. It went up to 32 and ballooned to that number at some point. And then also there have been years where it's just been 8. Again, I'm a traditional guy. I like the 16, and I like it all taking place on one night. The tournament is unofficially known as a launching pad for future main event talent, or in some years, just essentially adding a much-needed gimmick to the equation. So let's start off with the inaugural event, 1985. So it took place on July 8th, 1985, at Sullivan Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts. The tournament was won by Don Morocco, who was renamed Magnificent Morocco at the time. And while this particular tournament wasn't exactly memorable, it did feature the likes of Terry Funk, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who had most recently jumped ship from NWA. So there were some sizable names there. This tournament also featured a very odd moment when Tito Santana fought Jim Brunzell to a draw, and then Brunzell then won a coin toss. Why did they do this? To determine who would continue in the tournament. So can you imagine that? You plug away for 10, 15 minutes, and then they flip a coin, and Jim, who barely anybody remembers, by the way, moves along. So Magnificent Morocco's path to the crown is as follows. First round, Junkyard Dog, which is disappointing that he was eliminated that early, because if you saw Southern Wrestling, Junkyard Dog was huge, and he was always misused in WWF. Quarterfinal, Les Thornton, there's a name you don't hear very often. Semifinal, Pedro Morales, and in the final, the Iron Sheik, who the year prior dropped the WWF World Championship to Hulk Hogan. Overall, I would place this near the bottom. Just because it was the first doesn't make it the best. a little bit of deja vu in terms of the location. 1986, it was King of the Ring. It took place again at Sullivan Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts. And while the tournament itself featured DQs and a draw between Morocco and Roddy Piper that led to neither advancing, the ultimate winner was incredibly memorable. So upon entering the WWF, Harley Race was already the most accomplished NWA World Heavyweight Champion, one of the most respected and tenacious wrestlers of all time. Although, as per the WWF, all that history was basically erased, or at least never acknowledged by the time he made it to WWF. But keep in mind, despite Harley's success in various territories along with Japan, he was never introduced to the vast majority of the WWF audience. So this was really his first swing into that territory. Bobby Heenan dubbed Harley King Handsome Harley Race, with opponents forced to kneel before him. If not, they would be required to kiss his feet, whether they liked it or not. I enjoyed that. Path to the Crown, round one, it was George the Animal Steel. Quarterfinal, he had a bye. Semifinal, Billy Jack Haynes. That's a name you don't hear very often. And in the final, Pedro Morales. Well, once again, the tournament was lackluster. Harley Race really embraced the King gimmick. It made it quite memorable. I'm going to jump around a little bit chronologically, but there is a method to the madness. Ooh, yeah. Let me explain why. So, 1987 King of the Ring took place on September 4th, 1987 at the Providence Civic Center in Providence, Rhode Island. The winner of the tournament was the Macho Man, Randy Savage. But oddly, he did not adopt the Macho King moniker until 1989. So let's discuss his path to the crown. First round, Nikolai Volkov. Quarterfinal, Jim Brunzell again. Semifinal, Dangerous Danny Davis. And in the final, King Kong Bundy. No 5 count there. Here's where it gets a tad confusing. Harley Race had given the crown to Haku. He had a stomach injury that he sustained against Hulk Hogan. So basically, he passed along the robe, the crown, the gimmick to Haku, who again was King Haku, after being unable to compete. And then Jim Duggan won it from Haku. So he was King Duggan. Can you imagine that with a 2x4? And then with Savage eventually defeating Duggan, then they had a coronation that took place, which was led by the Genius, which again is Savage's real-life brother, Lanny Poffo, where Randy was now dubbed the Macho King. Ooh yeah, the Macho King, Randy Savage. Ted DiBiase gifted Macho King a scepter, which he would now use as a weapon. So despite winning in 1987, it eventually led to one of the Macho Man's most incredible runs of his entire career years later. I wouldn't necessarily place this event high, but the winner would ultimately become the greatest King of the Ring of all time, at least in my opinion. He just really embraced that, and it took him to the main event as well, too, which he already was at. King of the Ring 1988 took place on October 16th, 1988, at the Providence Civic Center in Providence, Rhode Island. Again, the same venue as the year prior. While the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, was already established with a great gimmick, it was only a natural fit that he added King to his impressive resume. Unfortunately, this was DiBiase's only real accolade as a singles competitor when you think about it. So his path to the crown, round one, Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Quarterfinal, Ken Patera. Semifinal, Ron Bass, again, a name you don't hear very often, the Outlaw Ron Bass, and in the final, Randy Savage. Now, again, keep in mind, the year after this, he hands the scepter to the Macho King in that ceremony. Very memorable. Go back and watch that on YouTube. I had some fun watching that recently. And many of these early tournaments sound memorable from a nostalgic standpoint, but throughout the 80s, there weren't really great matches featured, and again, it wasn't even featured on pay-per-view. King of the Ring 1989 took place on October 14th, 1989. It's also odd how it jumped around so much. It traditionally took place in the fall, then it moves to the summer. Okay, either way, we'll get to that momentarily. It took place for the 4th year in a row at the Providence Civic Center in Providence, Rhode Island. Next year was the final year it took place at the same venue. Then they did not return there until 1997. The main storyline heading into this tournament was the inevitable breakup between Strikeforce, which consisted of Tito Santana and Rick Martel. In my humble opinion, one of the most underrated, underappreciated stars in WWF history. He was fantastic. The two squared off in the finals, with Santana eventually becoming King of the Ring. Now, sadly, a built-in feud between the two collapsed. It failed to gain any substantial traction, which is very disappointing. So Tito's path to the crown included round 1, Bad News Brown, quarterfinal, the Warlord, semifinal, Akeem, and in the final, of course, Rick Martel. Now, there was no King of the Ring tournament in 1990 just because we can be inconsistent. We're the WWF, but it did return in 1991 to crown a future main eventer. King of the Ring 1991 took place on September 7th, 1991. Again, an entirely different month at this point, from the Providence Civic Center in Providence, Rhode Island. This would be the last time they were at this venue until 1997. They did return, but they mixed it up for several years, and rightfully so. I think sometimes you need to do that. Bret Hart, mentioned it off the hop, is the only two-time King of the Ring winner, and he also accomplished this feat in consecutive years, since there was no tournament in 1992. So the 1991 tournament was perhaps the oddest bracket to date, as there was little logic behind it. It also showed an obvious weakness in the depth of their roster at the time. It was just not great. So let me go through this, because there's a lot of different tag teams involved too. So you had Hawk versus Jerry Saggs. So basically Legion of Doom versus the Nasty Boys. Then Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who was basically renamed the Dragon, versus Ted DiBiase. Okay, great matchup. Jim Duggan versus Brian Knobbs. The Berserker versus IRS. Pete Doherty versus Bret Hart. Like, who? I barely remember him, and I love going back to watch old school professional wrestling. Skinner versus Virgil. That's not exactly a money-making match. Sid Justice versus the Warlord. And Animal versus The Undertaker. Again, the brackets were just very strange to me. So nevertheless, Bret Hart was crowned the winner, which propelled him to bigger matches higher up the card. So by now, he was already a multi-time tag champion, a one-time intercontinental champion, and then look at the next 14 months. Following this King of the Ring victory, Bret would defeat Roddy Piper at WrestleMania 8, being the first person to ever pin Piper in a WWF ring up until that point. And I believe the first person to pin him in general up until that point. Then he main evented SummerSlam 1992 against the British Bulldog in front of over 80,000 fans at Wembley Stadium. The Hitman then forced Ric Flair to tap out at a Superstars taping in November of 1992 to capture his first WWF championship. Some will argue that the Bret Hart era either began with his first IC reign or once he captured the WWF championship in Saskatoon, but I believe it may have very well started at this event. So his path to the crown included Pete Doherty in round 1. Again, I barely remember him. Quarterfinal, Skinner. Semifinal, it was a bye, and in the final, he defeated IRS. King of the Ring 1993 took place on June 13th, 1993. Again, they took a year off, and now they're moving it up to the summer months from the Nutter Center in Dayton, Ohio. Personally, this has always been my all-time favorite King of the Ring tournament due to Bret Hart displaying his diversity by having 3 very compelling and completely different matches against 3 very unique opponents. So each match was quite good. Go back and watch them. They really do hold up. And Bret was informed, by the way, keep this in mind, he could not win using the sharpshooter. So he had to be resourceful and creative in order to pull out the victories. The compelling story featured here was Bret overcoming the odds. I went back and I rewatched this entire tournament recently. It still holds true. So his first victory was a back-and-forth contest against a very game Razor Ramon that ultimately saw Bret get his arm raised after Razor attempted to execute a suplex from the top rope. Bret countered by landing on top of him. 1, 2, 3. He gained the pinfall victory. Next, Bret Hart wrestled an old rival in Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig. Boy, they're just glue. They fit together so well. They've never had a bad match, right? This was a much more methodical match, highlighting their masterful technical abilities. And the finish came when Bret reversed a small package pin from Perfect to earn the victory and advance to the tournament final. Now, spoiler, this is undoubtedly my favorite match from the tournament. It has to be. And it has to be perhaps my favorite overall, but we'll get to that later on when I give you the best of. So then the third and final bout was against a much more physically imposing Bam Bigelow. At that point, he's 400 pounds plus, who previously had a bye. So, of course, you can imagine he's much more rested up. So, originally, Luna Vachon got involved by hitting Bret with a chair. It led to Bam taking advantage, and he was declared the winner. Many forgot about this. Earl Hebner runs down. He waves it off, and the match was restarted. So, the conclusion now featured a very clever counter maneuver from Hart, where he climbed onto the shoulders of Bam Bigelow. He flipped Bigelow forward to pin him with this very clever victory roll. So during the ceremony, Bret Hart wins again, basically back-to-back years, because 1992 doesn't count because there was no King of the Ring, only two-time winner. And he's interrupted by Jerry Lawler. Now this makes sense for many reasons. He held the King moniker since 1994. I believe he took that away from Jackie Fargo. And ever since that point, he wasn't just the King of Memphis, he was the King, right? So he did not take too kindly to sharing this moniker with Bret. So he proceeded to attack the Hitman with the scepter. Now this led to a very memorable feud between the two, Kiss My Foot match. I'm sure you remember that one. So again, when you look at it from an actual victor from the tournament, Bret was ultra impressive here. King of the Ring 1994 took place on June 19th, 1994 at the Baltimore Arena in Baltimore, Maryland. You will notice a subtle trend here now taking place in the month of June. 2 months prior, Owen Hart defeated his brother Bret at WrestleMania 10 in arguably the greatest opening match in WrestleMania history. You will hear very few debate that. Owen was out to make a name for himself. He already was, and winning the King of the Ring tournament would be just the rise he required in his stock. And that's exactly what transpired. By the way, go out of your way to watch 1-2-3 Kid versus Owen Hart from the semifinal. Easily, hands down, the best match from the tournament. So here's his path to the crown. Round 1, Doink the Clown. Quarterfinal, Tatanka. Semifinal, the 1-2-3 Kid. And in the final, Razor Ramon. Jim the Anvil Neidhart even came out to help crown his brother-in-law. So during the coronation ceremony, Owen proceeded to disrespect his brother Bret. And this led to their 5-star classic steel cage match at SummerSlam 1994. The King of Hearts, Owen Hart, remains one of my all-time favorite winners, and it led to my all-time favorite steel cage match 2 months later. And here's where it takes a turn for the worse. King of the Ring 1995 took place on June 25th, 1995 at the Spectrum in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. The result, the most disjointed tournament and winner to date in a tournament featuring the likes of Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, Yokozuna, and Razor Ramon. The WWF somehow believed it was a brilliant idea to include Duke the Dumpster Droese. Yeah, he was going places, huh? Yeah. Mantar and Jacob Blue, later known as Ron Harris. It was embarrassingly structured, and perhaps that's why we deserved Mabel as the eventual winner. But there was a bright spot, a surprising one too. The Roadie versus Sparkplug Bob Holly. That was actually a damn good match. Go back and watch it. I believe it took place here. In the months that followed, King Mabel would eventually face Diesel in arguably the worst main event in SummerSlam history. I adamantly stand behind that too. It does not hold up at all. And with all due respect to Mabel, who's no longer with us, he never drew money, he wasn't a strong worker, and he was also known to be somewhat reckless, which caused a notable injury to The Undertaker. So here is his path to the crown. Round 1, Adam Bomb. Quarterfinal, The Undertaker. Semifinal, he had a bye, and in the final, Savio Vega. And given his work ethic, Savio would have been a much more logical choice. I always felt that he was underutilized in WWF. Look at his feud with Steve Austin a year later, and we will get to him in just a second. King of the Ring 1996 took place on June 23rd, 1996 from the Mecca Arena in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. As the story goes, Hunter Hearst Helmsley was in line to win the tournament, but that decision was revoked as punishment for the infamous curtain call at MSG. The narrative for this event saw the old gunslinger, Jake Roberts. He had quite a bit of past success in the WWF. He returned and attempted to redeem himself by winning the King of the Ring, but he was forced to clash with one of the hottest rising stars in the industry, a defiant Steve Austin. If you haven't watched the tournament in a while, Steve Austin versus Mark Marrow is easily one of the best matches in tournament history. A little bit of a sleeper there too, because Mark Marrow coming over as the Johnny B. Bad character, I thought he had some good moments in the WWF. Despite Vader being the overwhelming favorite, Roberts made it to the finals, but he succumbed to the stunner, with Austin getting his arm raised, and as Austin stepped upon the podium, Doc Hendricks, aka Michael Hayes, asked for his thoughts. And here's what Steve Austin said. And I'm not going to impersonate Stone Cold Steve Austin here. The first thing I want to be done is to get that piece of crap out of my ring. Don't just get him out of the ring, get him out of the WWF, because I've proved, son, without a shadow of a doubt, you ain't got what it takes anymore. You sit there, you thump your Bible, you say your prayers, and it didn't get you anywhere. Talk about your palms, talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says, I just whipped your ass. Of course, there was more to the promo, but that is the main portion we remember there. This was the beginning of Steve Austin's unrivaled ascension to the top of the industry, where he became the biggest box office attraction in the history of the industry. His catchphrase, Austin 3:16, remains one of the most popular in pro wrestling, and it led to the best-selling t-shirt of all time. To me, Steve Austin was the most important winner, as this was the launching pad he required to start his historic climb. His path to the crown, round one, Bob Holly. Quarterfinal, Savio Vega, by the way, a great rival in his early ride in WWF. Semifinal, Mark Merrow. Again, go out of your way to watch that match. And in the final, against the old gunslinger, Jake Roberts. King of the Ring 1997 took place on June 8th, 1997 at the Providence Civic Center in Providence, Rhode Island, one of the original homes of the tournament. This time around, only 8 competitors were announced, with his punishment long out of the way. Triple H, or Hunter Hearst Helmsley at the time, was once again inserted back into the conversation as new king. Quarterfinals took place on television, with the semifinals and finals taking place on pay-per-view. It came down to Mankind versus Hunter Hearst Helmsley. In rewatching this match, I would consider it one of the best in the history of the tournament, easily in the top 5. The victory over Mankind solidified Triple H, or again, Hunter Hearst Helmsley, as a top star for over 2 decades to follow. His path to the crown included, in the quarterfinal, Crush, semifinal, Ahmed Johnson, and in the final, Mankind. King of the Ring 1998 took place on June 28th, 1998, at the Pittsburgh Civic Center in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Taking place in the heart of the Attitude Era, there were many prominent names featured, such as Triple H, Owen Hart, Vader, Farouk, Jeff Jarrett, The Rock, and Ken Shamrock, of course. The first 2 rounds were aired on Raw, while the final 2 were aired on pay-per-view. So in the finals, The Rock tapped out via ankle lock, cleanly, by the way, to Ken Shamrock. And given the fact that the world's most dangerous man would eventually return to MMA just 1 year later, this was obviously the wrong move, but hindsight is 2020. And Ken Shamrock remains one of the more interesting what-if stories in pro wrestling history. When you think about it, Ken Shamrock was actually doing quite well, and he was very legitimate. I believe at the time, don't quote me on this, he had a record of something like 25-4-2, and then he goes back to MMA, and he was not the same person. Age did not do him well, obviously, and his skills were somewhat depleted. So he should have stuck with professional wrestling. Either way, this was an excellent finals match. Go back and watch it. Path to the crown for Ken Shamrock, round 1, Kama Mustafa, who eventually became the Godfather. Quarterfinal, Mark Henry. Semifinal, Jeff Jarrett. And in the final, The Rock. King of the Ring 1999 took place on June 27th, 1999 at the Greensboro Coliseum in Greensboro, North Carolina. The underlining narrative was the breakup of DX, with several members facing each other throughout the tournament. Billy Gunn's victory did little, if anything, to add to that. And while Gunn was a successful tag team wrestler, and at this point he's known as Mr. Ass, I'm an ass man, he simply failed to click as a single star. And I would place his victory as one of the most lackluster ever. Again, not nearly enough to dethrone Mabel from that title, but not great. So path to the crown, round 1, Viscera, which actually was Mabel. So how odd is that? Quarterfinal, Ken Shamrock. Semifinal, Kane. And in the final, he defeated X-Pac to become King of the Ring. King of the Ring 2000 took place at the Fleet Center in Boston, Massachusetts. The largest King of the Ring tournament to date, with 32 competitors taking part. I don't know how it ballooned to that number. Far too many, if you ask me. By the way, I highly recommend Chris Jericho versus Kurt Angle in the semifinals pay-per-view match. It still holds up as one of my favorites. With such a convoluted tournament featuring prominent superstars, the underwhelming conclusion saw Kurt Angle defeat Rikishi in less than 6 minutes. And you knew that Rikishi was not going to win King of the Ring. The one major bright spot out of this tournament was the confirmation of Kurt Angle being a main event caliber talent. There was no doubt about that. And at No Mercy in October of 2000, he would defeat The Rock to become the new WWF World Champion. Kurt Angle's path to the crown included Bradshaw in round 1, Bubba Ray Dudley in round 2. In the quarterfinal, Chris Jericho, semifinal Crash Holly. No idea how he got that far. And in the final, Rikishi. King of the Ring 2001 took place on June 24th, 2001 at the Continental Airlines Arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey. In terms of talent competing, this was one of the strongest brackets to date. And at this point in 2001, WWE, or WWF at the time, had purchased ECW and WCW. So they had a huge roster, a lot of depth there. And the finals saw Edge defeat Kurt Angle to win King of the Ring. In the aftermath, Christian would soon turn on Edge, and the two would go in separate directions. It took Edge several years to really make it to the top of the industry, but this is where the road was paved. And his path to the crown included Test in round 1, Perry Saturn in the quarterfinal, in the semifinal, Rhino, and in the final, Kurt Angle. I quite enjoyed the 2001 King of the Ring when I went back to watch it. King of the Ring 2002 took place on June 23rd, 2002 at the Nationwide Arena in Columbus, Ohio, perhaps most famously known as the tournament that forced Steve Austin to walk away from WWE. If you do recall, basically with no build-up, Steve Austin was supposed to face Brock Lesnar in the tournament and just lose. And Austin, to his credit, realized there's a lot of money being lost here. But walking out, he claims later on, was the wrong move. But this is exactly how it started. So this tournament was built around the next big thing, Brock Lesnar, rightfully so. So Austin losing to Brock Lesnar wasn't the wrong move. It just should have happened on a pay-per-view with the proper build. He ran through the competition, and he barely broke a sweat. And he was crowned the new King of the Ring. 2 months later, we fast forward, Brock Lesnar would headline SummerSlam 2002, defeating The Rock to capture the WWE Undisputed Championship. If we're talking about the most impressive victory, look no further than Brock's. It wasn't about the King moniker here. So he's not the best King of the Ring whatsoever, but it was more about validation that he is the next best thing, and he proved it. His path to the crown included round 1, Bubba Ray Dudley, quarterfinal Booker T, semifinal Test, and in the final, Rob Van Dam. That's an impressive roster right there. After a 4-year hiatus, the King of the Ring tournament returned in 2006 and transpired over the course of a month, with the finals taking place on May 21st, 2006 at the U.S. Airways Center in Phoenix, Arizona. This time around, the tournament reverted back to 8 competitors, which I hate. Just stick with the 16. Is it that difficult? At Judgment Day, there was no King of the Ring pay-per-view. Booker T defeated Bobby Lashley after Finlay interfered, and he hit Lashley with the shillelagh. Remember that? He'd just crack people on the noggin with it. And following this victory, Booker T was then referred to as King Booker, and he even adapted an English accent as well, too. He had all the cadence and the mannerisms of a king from centuries ago. It was so over the top and yet so incredibly entertaining. And then Booker formed a royal court that included his wife, Queen Charmel, Sir William Regal, and Sir Finlay. His path to the gold was Matt Hardy in the quarterfinal, the semifinal, Kurt Angle, and in the final, Bobby Lashley. In recent memory, Booker T definitely one of the best kings, no doubt about it. So it takes another year off. King of the Ring in 2008 took place, April 21st, 2008, from the Buy Low Center in Greenville, South Carolina. This time around, the tournament was exclusively held on Raw, and it also featured competitors from SmackDown and ECW. William Regal forced CM Punk to tap out in the finals to become your new King of the Ring. But unfortunately, 1 month later, Regal lost to Kennedy, and he was forced to quit and vacate his position as the Raw general manager. In reality, this was done to write off Regal due to a wellness policy violation. His path to the gold included Hornswoggle in the quarterfinal. I don't know how that happened. Semifinal Finlay, and in the final, CM Punk. Had Regal never received that wellness violation, I believe this could have been a very memorable run, but it was just ultimately cut short. It's very unfortunate. King of the Ring 2010, again, it's back after another couple of years, took place on November 29th, 2010 at the Wells Fargo Center in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. So they're back in Philadelphia. The tournament went back to the traditional 16 competitors, and it took place during episodes of Raw and SmackDown. The conclusion saw Sheamus defeat John Morrison. While it took a bit of time, this did lead Sheamus to become the World Heavyweight Champion after defeating Daniel Bryan in merely 18 seconds at WrestleMania 27. 5 years later, again without fail, no consistency, the King of the Ring once again returned during 2 nights on April 27th, April 28th, 2015. The quarterfinals took place on Raw, with the semifinals and finals taking place as a WWE Network exclusive event. The tournament was once again pared back to 8 competitors, with Bad News Barrett defeating Neville after catching him with a midair bull hammer elbow. All hail King Barrett. His path to the gold included Dolph Ziggler in the quarterfinal, semifinal R-Truth, and in the final, Neville. Despite changing his name to King Barrett and embracing the King moniker, he accomplished very little in the months that followed, and subsequently he requested his release in May of 2016. Taking a look at the 2019 tournament, we are back to 16 competitors as traditional. I like it. On Raw, Samoa Joe defeated Cesaro to advance. Cedric Alexander advanced over Sami Zayn. And on SmackDown, Elias defeated Kevin Owens. And Andrade defeated Apollo Crews. On Raw this coming week, it's Ricochet versus Drew McIntyre. The Miz versus Baron Corbin. On SmackDown, Ali versus Buddy Murphy. And Chad Gable versus his former tag team partner, Shelton Benjamin. After that, we have the quarterfinals and semifinals on Raw and SmackDown. In the finals will be taking place at Clash of Champions on Sunday, September 15th. Who's the favorite to win? I believe from SmackDown, at least the favorite over there to the finals will be Andrade, and perhaps on Raw it will be Ricochet. My favorite to win would be Ricochet, but I feel as though they will lean towards a heel, so either Andrade, perhaps Drew McIntyre. Personally, I wish this was a one-day network exclusive event, but beggars can't be choosers is back. That's all that matters, and I'm going to enjoy it. So, best king. I am going with, the Macho King, Randy Savage. He won it in 87, won it again from Jim Duggan in 1989. I believe he took it the furthest. Best tournament, I'm biased here, 1993. Best performance, Bret Hart from that very same 1993 tournament. Most important moment, Austin 316. It changed the landscape forever. Best match, I'm going with Bret Hart versus Mr. Perfect from 1993, but some others include Bret Hart versus Bam Bigelow, Mark Marrow versus Stone Cold Steve Austin in 1996, one of my favorites. I went back and rewatched it. Wow, that was a surprise. Chris Jericho versus Kurt Angle, King of the Ring 2000, Bret Hart versus Razor Ramon, and Mankind versus Hunter Hearst Helmsley from 1997. Hope you enjoyed this episode as we relive the entire history of the King of the Ring tournament. Next week is primed to be a busy one because we have NXT UK TakeOver Cardiff, so a full preview with predictions for that. Plus, same day, next Saturday, it will be AEW All Out, so I will also provide a full preview and predictions for that show as well. If you would be so kind, wherever you listen to this program, whether it is YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review. Also on YouTube, subscribe there. I'm on the journey to 1,000 subscribers, that illustrious number. Oh, so close. Just at about 900, so just 100 away. So keep telling your friends, family, and of course, fellow wrestling fans to tune in on a weekly basis. And until next week, it will be one day early. I'm going to give you an extra day to digest both previews and predictions. So until then, happy trails to you until we meet again.
This concludes another episode of The Signature Spot with Chris Toplack. For new episodes, subscribe on YouTube, Stitcher, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, or iTunes. And don't forget to follow The Signature Spot on Facebook for exclusive clips, polls, and opinions.
She wasn't dead, you only left her body for a little while. spite of the